The wind howled mercilessly through the skeletal branches, carrying with it a biting chill that gnawed deep into the bones of the land. Outside the isolated cabin nestled against the edge of a frozen forest, snowflakes fell in relentless waves, blanketing the world in a suffocating white silence. The night was thick with frost, and the moon, a pale sentinel in the sky, cast long shadows that stretched like ghostly fingers across the frozen earth. Suddenly, a sharp sound pierced the stillness, the soft scrape of hooves against ice, a desperate, uneven rhythm that echoed through the cold air. At the edge of the clearing, barely visible through the swirling snow, a Mustang stood trembling, its dark coat dusted with frost, nostrils flaring with each ragged breath. The stallion's eyes, wide and pleading, caught the faint light from the cabin's single window. He pawed at the frozen ground, nostrils steaming in the frigid air, desperate for warmth, for safety. Inside the cabin, the faint glow of a lantern flickered against rough wooden walls. The man who inhabited this remote refuge was alone, his silhouette cast long and solitary against the modest hearth. His weathered hands gripped a chipped mug, the warmth of the fading tea offering a fragile comfort against the unforgiving cold that pressed in from outside. His eyes, shadowed and heavy with years of solitude, flicked toward the window where the restless shadow of the Mustang danced in the moonlight. For a moment, the man simply watched. The stallion's silent plea echoed louder in his heart than in his ears. He had learned long ago that nature's cruelty was relentless and unforgiving, but something in those eyes stirred a memory buried deep beneath layers of pain and regret. The cabin door was bolted tight, and yet, behind that barrier, loneliness clawed at him just as fiercely as the frost outside. The man took a slow breath, the cold air seeping into his lungs even indoors, and rose from his worn chair. He moved toward the door with hesitant steps, each one heavy with the weight of an unspoken decision. His rough fingers traced the worn wood of the door, fingers trembling, not from the cold but from a storm of emotions he had long tried to bury. Outside, the Mustang shifted nervously, his breath ragged, body trembling from exhaustion and cold. The snow beneath him had turned icy and hard, offering no comfort for his raw, weary hooves. The stallion's coat, once sleek and proud, was now matted with frost and bits of frozen earth. His powerful muscles, usually a symbol of strength and freedom, now appeared gaunt, worn from days of struggle against the merciless winter. The man's eyes softened as he looked down at the horse's footprints leading toward the cabin, tracks that told a story of desperation and survival. He knew the wilds well. He knew what a creature like this must have endured. The nights were long and unforgiving. The cold could strip life away in its merciless grip. And yet, here was this magnificent animal, standing on the edge of surrender, still clinging to a flicker of hope. A sudden gust of wind rattled the cabin walls, sending a shiver through the man's frame. He glanced back at the small fire in the hearth, a fragile shield against the cold. The warmth was fleeting, and he understood that to let this wild spirit inside was to invite chaos into his carefully guarded solitude. But the alternative, leaving the stallion to the night, was a sentence harsher than any he had faced himself. With a shaky breath, he released the bolt and slowly eased the door open. The cold air rushed in, biting and sharp, but it was followed immediately by the soft, hesitant step of the Mustang crossing the threshold. The stallion's breath came in quick puffs, his legs stiff and trembling as he stepped onto the creaking wooden floor. The man reached out a tentative hand, fingers brushing against the frosted mane, and felt the rough warmth beneath his touch. Inside, the cabin was sparse, a sanctuary built from necessity rather than comfort. Rough-hewn furniture stood sturdy against the chill, and the faint scent of pine and earth mingled with the lingering smoke from the hearth. Yet beneath the surface there was something else, a subtle tension as if the walls themselves held secrets just waiting to be revealed. The Mustang's eyes scanned the dim room nervously. His ears flicked toward a shadowed corner where a faint noise, barely audible, stirred his attention. The man noticed the shift and followed the horse's gaze, a knot tightening in his chest. There was more to this night than just the desperate arrival of a frozen horse. "Easy now," he murmured, voice rough from disuse and long solitude. "You're safe here." The words felt strange on his tongue, unfamiliar in their gentleness. The stallion took a few cautious steps forward, his breath warming the cold air as he settled near the hearth. The man knelt beside him, pulling a threadbare blanket from a nearby chair and draping it carefully over the horse's shivering frame. He could feel the tremors running through the animal's body, a stark reminder of the brutal night outside. As the warmth seeped into the horse's muscles, the man allowed his mind to drift back to days long past, a time when life was filled with laughter, companionship, and hope. He remembered a time when he had owned horses of his own, when the bond between man and animal was a sacred trust, a language without words. But loss had come swiftly like a winter storm, and with it, a retreat from the world. Now, with the Mustang's quiet trust placed in his hands, something stirred within him, a fragile ember of purpose and connection. The horse's survival depended on him, and perhaps in turn his own survival depended on this chance to care once more. The night deepened and the storm outside raged on. The man fetched a bucket of water and began gently cleaning the frost from the stallion's coat, careful not to cause pain. His fingers found old scars, stories etched into the horse's skin, wounds from battles unseen but deeply felt. A sudden, soft noise drew both their attention, a faint, pitiful whimper from behind a closed door at the far end of the cabin. The man's heart tightened. He had not expected company tonight. The Mustang's ears flattened, a low nicker escaping his throat as he stepped protectively closer. The man's hand hovered over the doorknob, uncertain. What awaited on the other side? Another creature in need? A threat? The quiet desperation in the cabin seemed to pulse with the rhythm of that unanswered question. He looked once more into the stallion's trusting eyes and made his choice. Slowly he turned the knob. Beyond the door, the dim glow of a lantern revealed a small figure curled into a worn blanket, a foal, trembling and weak, eyes glassy with cold and fear. The man's breath caught in his throat. 2 lives, fragile and broken, now resting in the fragile warmth of this forgotten cabin. For a moment, silence fell, a fragile truce between man and nature, between past wounds and hopeful beginnings. Outside, the wind howled still, but inside, a quiet resolve began to take root. The man knelt beside the foal, his rough hands gentle as he stroked its damp coat. The Mustang nuzzled the smaller creature protectively, a bond forming in the shadow of hardship. The fire flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and the night's cold seemed to retreat, if only for a moment. The man glanced toward the window, where the storm raged on with unforgiving fury. Yet here, within these walls, warmth and life had found a foothold. It was a fragile beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. And as the first light of dawn threatened the horizon, a quiet hope settled in the cabin's heart, a hope born of compassion, resilience, and the courage to face whatever the frozen world might throw their way. The man wrapped the blanket tighter around the foal and settled back against the wall, exhaustion tugging at his limbs but his spirit alight with purpose. Outside, the storm's howl softened to a whisper, as if nature itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would come next. Tonight was just the beginning. And the story was far from over. The dawn broke slowly over the frozen landscape, painting the sky in muted hues of pale pink and icy blue. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world glazed in frost, where every branch, every blade of grass, shimmered like a fragile sculpture carved from glass. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with a quiet tension, a fragile sanctuary cradling 2 fragile lives. The man sat by the small hearth, tending the fire with careful hands, his eyes flickering toward the foal nestled beneath the blanket. The tiny creature's chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, a stark contrast to the powerful Mustang who stood nearby, still shivering but slowly regaining strength. The bond between them was palpable, forged in hardship and trust, and it stirred something deep within the man, a mixture of awe, responsibility, and a flicker of hope he had thought long extinguished. He reached out cautiously, his fingers brushing the foal's damp coat. The softness beneath his touch was a sharp reminder of the fragility of life. The foal's eyes fluttered open, revealing pools of fragile innocence that seemed too pure to belong in this harsh world. The man's heart clenched. He had lived in solitude for so long, guarding himself against pain, but now that pain was no longer distant. It was here, raw and immediate. Outside, the Mustang paced restlessly, his breath creating clouds of mist in the cold air. His ears twitched at every sound, the distant call of a crow, the faint rustling of wind through the trees. He was a creature of the wild, born to roam free under open skies, yet here he was, confined within the 4 walls of a cabin, reliant on the mercy of a man he barely knew. The man's thoughts drifted back to the past, memories etched deep in his mind like scars. He had once been a rancher, a man of the land who understood the language of horses and men alike. But tragedy had torn that life from him. A fire had ravaged his home, claiming his family and shattering his spirit. Since then he had retreated into isolation, a ghost haunted by loss. Yet now, fate had brought him these 2 lost souls, bound by survival and a desperate need for shelter. He couldn't turn them away. Not this time. As the morning light filtered through frost-coated windows, the man set about preparing a meal. The kitchen was humble, but the simple act of cooking stirred a sense of normalcy he hadn't felt in years. The Mustang watched with keen eyes, nostrils flaring at the scent of warm oats and softened hay. The foals stirred, drawn by the faint promise of nourishment. The man carefully ladled warm water into a trough, adding softened grains. He knelt beside the animals, speaking softly, his voice low and steady. "You're safe now. We'll get through this, together." The words felt heavier than air, laden with a promise that neither he nor the horses could yet fully grasp. Hours passed, and the cold began to relent, the first tentative rays of sun coaxing warmth from the earth. The Mustang's trembling lessened, and he lowered his head to drink eagerly. The foal took tentative sips, still weak but gaining strength. The cabin, once silent and somber, filled with quiet life, the gentle sounds of breathing, the soft scrape of hooves on wooden floors, and the steady crackle of the fire. But the sanctuary was fragile. The man knew the storm had only exposed the surface of deeper dangers lurking beyond the trees. Hunters roamed these parts, men who saw wild horses as trophies or profit. The landscape was no longer a place of freedom for the Mustang, it was a gauntlet of threats, where every shadow could conceal a trap. The man's gaze hardened as he remembered the rumors whispered in nearby towns, tales of cruel men who captured horses, tearing them from the wild to sell at auctions or worse. His chest tightened with a familiar ache. He had witnessed such brutality once before, and it had nearly destroyed him. Now, with the Mustang and foal under his care, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Protecting them wasn't just about survival, it was about redemption, a chance to atone for past failures and reclaim a piece of the man he had lost. The Mustang, sensing the man's resolve, pressed closer, nuzzling the foal protectively. The bond between the two horses was undeniable, a fierce guardianship born of instinct and necessity. The man's heart swelled with a mixture of admiration and tenderness. Here, in this humble cabin surrounded by winter's grasp, life clung stubbornly to hope. The day wore on with slow, deliberate care. The man tended to the horses, brushing away frost and debris, checking their injuries with practiced eyes. He noticed the Mustang's flank bore old scars, cruel marks from past encounters, each one a testament to a life lived on the edge. The foal's legs were weak, trembling with exhaustion, but his spirit remained unbroken. As dusk approached, a new sound drifted on the cold air, distant voices, harsh and unfamiliar, cutting through the silence like a blade. The man froze, senses sharpening. He peered out the frosted window, scanning the shadows beyond the trees. Hunters. The realization sent a cold shiver down his spine. The sanctuary was no longer safe. He quickly moved to secure the cabin, bolting doors and windows, but the weight of the threat pressed heavily on his shoulders. The Mustang pawed anxiously at the floor, sensing danger but uncertain of its source. The foal whinnied softly, a sound fraught with fear. The man's mind raced. He knew the terrain well, hidden paths, secret clearings where the horses could find refuge. But the hunters were skilled and ruthless, their traps cunning and merciless. To protect the Mustang and foal, he would have to face the dangers he had long avoided. Night fell and with it, a heavy silence. The cabin became a fortress, the flickering fire casting eerie shadows on the walls. The man sat between the two horses, a silent guardian in a world grown cold and hostile. He whispered promises into the dark, vows of protection and hope. "I won't let them take you," he vowed. "We'll find a way. Together." Outside, the hunters' voices grew nearer, their footsteps crunching over frozen leaves. The man's grip tightened on a rusted hunting rifle resting against the wall, the weight of responsibility heavy but necessary. The Mustang shifted closer to the foal, shielding him with his body, eyes bright with defiance. The man drew a steadying breath, the firelight reflecting in his determined gaze. This night would test them all, man and horse bound by fate, standing on the edge of survival. And in the heart of that frozen wilderness, a silent battle for freedom was about to begin. The story was no longer just about shelter from the storm. It was about courage in the face of cruelty, about fighting for life when all seemed lost. And it was only the beginning. The night deepened, swallowing the world outside the cabin in cold shadows and whispering winds. Inside, the flickering fire cast wavering light across the rugged faces of man and beast, each grappling with the harsh reality that their fragile sanctuary might soon be breached. The man sat quietly, his senses stretched taut like the strings of a bow, every creak of the old cabin stirring a knot of tension deep within his chest. He glanced toward the Mustang, whose powerful muscles remained tense despite the warmth of the fire. The wild horse's dark eyes reflected a mixture of fear and fierce determination, a spirit unbroken by past cruelty but wary of what lay ahead. Beside the stallion, the foal rested uneasily, too young to fully understand the danger but instinctively clinging to the shelter and protection that the cabin provided. Outside, the voices of the hunters wove through the frosted night air, low and cruel. Their footsteps echoed like thunder in the stillness, growing nearer with every passing moment. The man's heart pounded, a primal rhythm that matched the urgency of their predicament. He knew these men were not merely opportunists, they were hunters driven by greed and callousness, relentless in their pursuit of wild horses to capture and sell, tearing families apart without remorse. He reached down, running a steady hand along the Mustang's coarse neck. The stallion's muscles twitched under his touch, sensing the unspoken promise of protection. This connection, fragile yet profound, was the only anchor the man had against the storm of uncertainty gathering beyond the walls. The hunters' voices grew louder, fragments of cruel laughter and sharp commands punctuating the silence. They were moving carefully, aware that their quarry was wary and fast. The man's fingers tightened around a worn rifle, a relic from his past life. Though he was no longer the man who once roamed wide-open ranges, the weight of this weapon in his hands stirred a flicker of old resolve. He rose silently, motioning the Mustang and foal toward the back of the cabin where a hidden trapdoor led to a small cellar. It was cramped but secure, a refuge beneath the floorboards where the horses could hide from prying eyes and deadly traps. The stallion hesitated, nostrils flaring, but the urgency in the man's eyes compelled him forward. The foal scrambled after, trembling but obedient. Lowering the trapdoor with a muffled thud, the man placed a heavy crate over it, masking the entrance. The sound of approaching footsteps sent a fresh wave of adrenaline coursing through his veins. He returned to the main room, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. The hunters reached the cabin's front door moments later, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Rough voices demanded entry, threats hanging heavy like icicles in the cold. The man steeled himself, stepping into the doorway to meet them face to face. "You won't find what you're looking for here," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of quiet defiance. The leader of the hunters sneered, eyes cold and calculating. "We've heard there are horses here. We're taking them one way or another." The man's gaze hardened. "Not while I'm here." A tense silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the dying fire inside. The hunters exchanged glances, weighing their options. They were outnumbered by the harsh wilderness itself, and the man's resolve seemed as unyielding as the ice outside. Suddenly, one of them lunged forward, slamming the door hard against the man's chest. The force sent him staggering back, pain flaring across his ribs. He stumbled but caught himself, gripping the doorframe as the hunters pressed closer. Inside, the Mustang's nostrils flared, panic rising in his eyes. The foal whimpered softly, sensing the escalating danger. The man's mind raced. He needed to buy time to protect these creatures who had become more than mere animals to him. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small flare he had kept for emergencies. With a quick flick, he ignited it and tossed it toward the nearest window. The flare erupted in a blaze of red light, shattering the night's darkness and momentarily blinding the hunters. "Run!" the man shouted. The Mustang, sensing the command, bolted toward the cellar entrance just as the hunters scrambled to recover. The foal stumbled but was quickly guided by the stallion's protective presence. The man slammed the trapdoor shut and dragged the crate back into place. Inside the cellar, the air was thick and cold, but it was safe. The horses huddled close, their bodies trembling but alive. The man descended last, his breath shallow and urgent. He closed the trapdoor above, muffling the chaos outside. From below, he could hear the hunters pounding on the cabin walls, frustrated shouts echoing through the night. The man's heart ached, not from fear but from the knowledge that this battle was far from over. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the occasional scrape of a hoof or the man's steady breathing. Outside, the storm had returned, swirling snowflakes against the windows like ghostly fingers. The hunters' voices faded, replaced by the howling wind and the steady rhythm of survival. In the cold depths of the cellar, the man knelt beside the foal, cradling its fragile body against his own. The Mustang stood guard nearby, muscles coiled like springs, eyes alert to every sound. They were a fragile family forged in desperation, bound by a fierce will to endure. The man's thoughts drifted back to the past, to the life he had lost and the scars he carried. He had once believed that pain was something to hide away, a weakness to be buried beneath layers of solitude. But now, faced with the raw reality of these creatures' suffering and courage, he understood that pain was also a source of strength. It was the fire that drove him to protect, to fight, to hope. He spoke softly to the horses, his voice a balm in the cold darkness. "We'll find a way out of this. Together." As dawn approached, the storm finally began to ease, the wind's fury giving way to a fragile calm. The man knew that the hunters would return, and that the battle for freedom was only just beginning. But within him burned a growing flame, a fierce determination that no amount of cold or cruelty could extinguish. The Mustang nickered softly, nudging the man's hand with warm breath. The foal stirred, its eyes opening to the promise of a new day. In that small hidden cellar beneath the frozen earth, hope was alive. And the fight for their freedom was far from over. The first light of dawn seeped through the frost-coated window panes, casting a pale glow that cut through the lingering shadows of night. Inside the cabin, the man's breath was steady but determined. The quiet hum of awakening life outside belied the tension that still gripped his chest like a vice. He glanced toward the hidden trapdoor beneath the worn rug, the secret shelter that held the Mustang and foal, his fragile charges in a world that seemed relentlessly cruel. The hunters had returned under cover of darkness once before, but the man knew this time would be different. They would not leave without what they sought, blinded by greed and indifferent to suffering. His resolve, however, had hardened like forged steel. This was no longer about mere survival. It was a battle for dignity, freedom, and the promise of a future untainted by fear. He descended the narrow stairs into the cellar, the Mustang's deep, steady breathing a balm against the chill. The foal stood weak but eager, its small frame trembling less than before. The man knelt beside them, feeling the raw pulse of life beneath their coats. In their eyes burned an unyielding spirit, one he vowed to protect no matter the cost. Suddenly, a loud crash shattered the fragile calm above. The hunters had forced their way into the cabin, smashing windows and tearing through furniture in their desperate search. The man's grip tightened on the crude spear he had fashioned from a broken chair leg, a weapon born from necessity and fierce determination. The air was thick with dust and tension as footsteps thundered above. The cabin groaned under the assault, beams creaking ominously. Time was slipping through their fingers like grains of sand. Then came the moment that would define them all. The Mustang, sensing the danger beyond the trapdoor, let out a powerful whinny, a call that echoed through the cellar's cold walls like a battle cry. The foal nickered in response, small but defiant. The man rose slowly, his eyes blazing with a newfound fire. He would not stand idle while these souls he had come to love were torn away. With careful breath and steady heart, he climbed the stairs, spear poised. As he emerged into the torn-apart cabin, he came face to face with the leader of the hunters, a cold man with eyes like shards of ice. "You don't know what you're up against," the hunter snarled, brandishing a heavy rope. The man held his ground, voice steady but fierce. "I know exactly what I'm fighting for." The two men circled, the tension palpable, the air thick with unspoken threats. Then, in a sudden burst of courage, the man lunged forward, thrusting the spear not with intent to kill but to defend, to protect what mattered most. A struggle ensued, raw and desperate. Furniture splintered, shadows danced wildly, and every second felt stretched thin by the weight of consequence. Outside, the Mustang pawed the ground restlessly, sensing the outcome of the clash within the walls. The foal pressed close, eyes wide and unblinking. Finally, with a swift maneuver born of sheer will, the man disarmed the hunter, sending the rope clattering to the floor. The hunter staggered, defeated but not broken. Breathing heavily, the man looked down at his adversary and then beyond, to the doorway where the sun's first rays spilled in like a blessing. "Leave now," he commanded, "or this ends differently." The hunters, realizing the fight was lost, retreated into the morning mist, their footsteps fading like ghosts. The cabin settled into silence once more, save for the soft sounds of life awakening anew. The man returned to the cellar, his body aching but his spirit unbroken. He knelt beside the Mustang and foal, running a steady hand along their backs. "You're safe now," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "We'll find a place where no one can hurt you again." Days passed in quiet healing. The man tended to the foal's wounds and fed the Mustang warm oats, each moment weaving a fragile tapestry of trust and hope. Outside, the world remained harsh, but inside that cabin, love grew stronger than the coldest winter. One crisp morning, the man stood at the threshold, watching as the Mustang and foal stepped into the soft embrace of the sun-dappled meadow. Their coats shimmered with newfound vitality, muscles rippling with strength and freedom. The man felt a swell of pride and sorrow, a bittersweet recognition that the day had come to let them go. But as the stallion glanced back, eyes meeting his with a silent promise, the man understood that this bond was eternal. With a final nod, the horses galloped into the wild, the foals' joyful neighs carried on the wind like a hymn to resilience. The man stood alone but not lonely, his heart fuller than it had ever been. He had become their guardian, their friend, a beacon of hope in a world that so often forgot the power of compassion. And in that moment, beneath the vast expanse of sky, he knew their journey was just beginning. For freedom, like courage, is born in the fiercest storms, and carried forward by those brave enough to fight for it. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the land in golden light, the man turned back toward the cabin, ready to face whatever came next, with a spirit unbroken and a heart forever changed. His story, and theirs, was a testament to the enduring strength of the human and the wild, forever intertwined by fate and the unyielding call of freedom.